Welcome back to the Co-Pilot Coaching Podcast. Mary Lightfoot, Gary Lightfoot. We are your coaches and owners at Co-Pilot Coaching, and we've got some pretty fun stuff to discuss today.
Absolutely.
So we want to talk about what it takes to be a great leader, not even just a good leader, but a great leader, and what the difference is between a manager who's just telling people what to do and someone who's really moving the needle. Do you have a top one? Like the number one thing that makes a great leader that you think of?
I think it's important to challenge your team and put together a team that's willing to get outside their comfort zone. And so constantly challenging them to grow and learn and them to develop leadership skills also.
Yeah, it's constantly growing. You had a next level leadership team. I think you led by example so much in that, like, you were always growing the people on your team and being active about it and intentional about it. And so it made them kind of look at their team separately. And that's how I'd always looked at my business. If I am the owner, I'm really worried about, and I find myself constantly worrying about the customer experience or whether or not things are happening, then that always kind of led back to a leadership issue to me.
Yeah.
Because if I'm pouring into my leaders, then they're going to naturally pour into their teams. Those teams are going to go out and serve the customers. And so it almost always comes back to a leadership thing. And so a great leader is somebody whose main number one focus is somebody who's pouring into their people.
I think a good way to do that is to make it a priority to have time with each person that you're leading so you can get to know them, what their goals are. How can you help them reach their individual targets or their personal targets? I always wanted leaders that worked for me that were not only willing to work on the business, but to get personally, whether it's relationships, their wealth, their health, was a big thing that I always wanted to be a good example for, but challenge them to be better people in their own lives. And then they became better employees because of it.
I remember there was a time where you almost had like a KPI metric for your leadership where you were like, well, how many of my employees got to buy their first house?
Yeah.
How many of my employees felt like they were in a place to have a baby? I mean, you even had an old employee who called you and was like, I don't think I want another kid, and I'm too busy for this, and I can't afford this and all that. And you were like, dude, what are you even doing? What's your why? What's your goals? What are your targets?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love to challenge them for sure.
It's fun. My director of operations at Outbound 360 told me that in the interview, I had the book club notes up on the whiteboard still in the area that I was interviewing her with, my office, which was the meeting room at the time. And we had the book that we were reading and the theme for that quarter. And we didn't even discuss it during the interview. But she told me 6 years later, she was like, well, that's why I chose to come there. I was like, I just knew, I could tell from just the notes on your whiteboard that your focus was growing your team. And the book wasn't even a business book. And so that was part of it too. You have to actually care about them as people, not just as what they can provide to you.
100%.
So if you were going to think that there's a balance issue with leadership sometimes between having the confidence to be a really strong leader and having the humility to be a servant leader, what does that look like for you? What are some ways that you kind of bring humility into a leadership role, and how does that impact your team?
Well, I'd always look at, where they're at on their journey in leadership, and then start them off with little things that they can learn and grow from. And it could be as simple as making them do an individual video and send it to their wife or whatever, as opposed to, you're going to get up in front of the room and now give a presentation. He wasn't ready for that yet, but you can work them along this ladder of leadership. Once they master this one, now you go to another level and you challenge them to go even further. You just have to work them up that leadership ladder and continue to get them outside their comfort zone to learn and grow.
Not expecting too much of somebody outside of their capability zone. Yeah. We've talked a lot so many times about want it, get it, or have the capacity. We learned that from, I think Traction was the book originally. We read it. And leadership applies the same way. It's the same as any role. Do they really want to be a leader? Did you shove somebody into a management position because you needed them there and they were the only one available? Or do they really want to be a leader? Do they understand? Do they get it? Do they understand what it takes to be a leader? But then at a very base level, there's a have the capacity. And I do think that leadership is a skill that can be learned and developed.
Yeah.
But I do also think that there's people that are natural leaders that they incline that way. And it's not to say that the only leaders in your company would have to be natural leaders. But I do think that you want to kind of understand if they even have the capacity to be in that leadership role. Man, bad leadership, what a culture killer that is.
Oh, 100%.
Like, what would you say is, if you had to go down to a lesson of like a trait that you would look for, that you would avoid in a leader? If you said, this is a red flag, if somebody is like this, I would never put them into a leadership role in the company. What would one of those be for you?
One of the things come to mind is just negativity. I can't stand negativity. Now, if we've got a challenge or a problem to solve, let's solve it. But complaining or being negative. And another one is just, I always wanted my leaders to be willing to grow outside the company. I had a leader in my company at one point, and they were not willing to participate in challenges of health or wealth, saving money, or, reading a book. They just didn't want to do any of that stuff. I'm just here to do work in your business. I want people that want to learn and grow and get after it. So that's a big one for me too.
Absolutely. Well, so one of our core values at Outbound 360 was embracing change.
Yeah.
And so that went back to a core value thing for me. If I've got a leader in my company who doesn't want to do those things, well,
that wouldn't fit.
Yeah, you're not a core value fit at that point.
Sure.
I don't have any interest in that. And your team's always going to be a reflection of your leadership. And so I looked at that too. I'm like, if I have this trait that I don't like about a leader in my company, it's almost a guarantee that within 6 months, the rest of their team's going to have that same trait. So if this is like a little teeny tiny thing that annoys you about your manager right now, well, it's going to be a huge thing that annoys you about everybody in your company if you let them stay in a leadership role.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah. I there's been some, what would you say is, but also just incredible successes. Tell us a story, like who's somebody that was a leader in your business who grew up from, a helper on a truck or something that. You had so many of those stories. Tell us one of them.
Oh man, I've got so many people that I hired that, I use Brendan as an example. I actually met him at a garage sale, believe it or not. And he had such a dynamic personality. He was positive, just uplifting. And so, man, I've got to hire that guy. And so I did. I hired him. He started out, I think, in the warehouse. Eventually had such a dynamic person. I said, I got to get this guy in front of my customers. So we trained him to be a tune-up specialist. And then he was so good at that, he went on to sales. And so he was a sales rep for me, going out and seeing our customers, super successful at that. And then he was promoted to sales manager. So you take a kid I met at a garage sale, and now he's a sales manager of my company. Later on. And so, yeah, there's a success story for sure.
That story is so reflective too of what you just said, where it's like when you're like something that you would avoid in a leader is negativity. Well, like from the positive perspective of like, maybe he didn't have the skill sets right then, but like you find somebody like that who embraces that at a very core level, something you love, positivity, motivation, just dynamic personality, hire him and figure out where it is. Skill set can be taught. Even leaderships can be taught. If I find somebody who's smart, willing, passionate about growing, flexible, and just kind of patient, and they're in our team, I don't care what role they're in right now. They could be a cashier at Whataburger. And I've interacted with them every day. I've 100% recruited people from Whataburger before, and Chick-fil-A. Because it's like, that's what you're really looking for, and not just team members, but in leaders especially.
Yeah. I think if you're a business owner, you always should be recruiting, keeping your eyes open, interacting with people, and looking for that talent because it's out there.
All right, so let's shift a little bit to this leadership conversation when it comes to like the traits of a great leader. But I think a challenge that probably a lot of people face out there is they have a leader in place in their company right now, and maybe they do have a core values misalignment there. They are negative a lot, or they hired them because they were really skilled at the technical piece of the job, but then they realized later that they don't actually know how to lead people and they don't really like people. So when it comes to, but they're concerned about getting rid of this person in a leadership role, the impact that it's going to have on their team, the impact that it's trying to replace them. So what are the first steps that you would take? If you said, I've got this leader, I know at the end of the day, I've got to get rid of them, what's the first thing that you do?
Well, I'd probably look for another area in the company that might fit her skill set that she has. Unless it's core values, then, that's just not a fit. If it's not a fit there, it's not a fit anywhere. But if they have the core values and they have a skill set somewhere, you have to analyze, what is that skill set? Where is the right seat on the bus for this person to sit? And that's probably, I would try to make a horizontal type move with them.
Hope you're not thinking about me, said she. You're like, oh, I got to get this chick out of here.
Not hardly.
Well, we're partners in the company, so you'd have a hard time with that one. That'd be a tough exit for him, I tell you. But okay, that makes a lot of sense because it goes back to right person, right seat. Like maybe they're great for the company, but just not right in that leadership role.
100%.
You have leaders in your company and you have influencers in your company, and those are two different things. We used to talk about this, that it's like there's conversations that happen around all the guys are cleaning out their trucks, right? Or the water cooler at the office. And there's people that are involved in those conversations who are influencers in your company, but maybe they're not in a place yet to be a leader. Maybe they're never going to be a leader. They're in the role that they're in, but they could have an impact. They have a significant impact in their energy. Can people match it? You can tell who these people are in meetings. They're talking, so everybody's getting engaged, or if they're blowing it off and they're irritated by it, everybody's following along.
Yeah.
And if you can sometimes if you're implementing a new initiative, or if you know that you're in a place where you're going to need to replace a leader, then you can involve those influencers in the process. But I would say is that if you have a leader at just a base level, like if we had a leader in the company who was a cancer in the company, who we kind of, in the process of meeting, we're like, oh, wow, okay, maybe this should have happened 6 months ago, but they're wasting time, they're wasting money, they're really hurting the culture, they're hurting the people. We didn't wait until we had a plan in order to fire them. We said, nope. Like you don't wait until at the end of, chemotherapy to cut out the cancer. You go in first. You start with the surgery. You say, get rid of the bulk of the problem. And then you go back and you try to repair and you fix and everything. Yeah. So I'd say that that's probably the toughest thing. If you have a leader that is in place, and get rid of them. Yeah. And then start the process of replacing.
Yeah. And then after you do, you'll have everybody coming up to you and go, boss, what took you so long to do it? Oh my gosh.
It's the confirmation that you made the right decision.
For sure.
I've seen the concern of where it's like, well, if I fire this manager, then these 5 people are going to go with them. Okay, if you fire a really crappy manager who's a culture who's a cancer in your culture, and 5 people are going to go with them, guess what? It just meant the cancer spread, and
exactly.
Then you get rid of all of it at the same time. And I don't know that we've ever had a termination of a manager that we regretted.
No,
I don't think so.
No,
and we haven't had to have very many of those because we're really, really picky when we hire them.
For sure.
But we've laterally moved some, but just straight up terminations aren't that difficult. But
well,
awesome.
You got to hire on your core values.
Exactly, hire on your core values, and that goes all the way up to leadership. It can be tough. A lot of our followers are people in the home services industry, and so it can be tough because there's licensing issues, right? Mm-hmm. So it comes into your plumbing team or your electrical team or your HVAC team, whatever. You look at the guy that has the highest license, and this kind of default in our brains goes to, well, then they're going to be the manager. Yeah. And so often that is like the worst possible situation. And just keeping in mind that like the leader of a department doesn't have to even, like a sales manager doesn't have to be a great salesperson in the home, potentially. But the number one most important skill set is that they're a great leader, that they know how to influence a culture, they know how to influence their teams. Is great, but I don't know that it's required.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
We've had service managers that weren't in the field.
Even paid people for their license, but they're still a technician out in the field, and you have somebody that's leading them that has those leadership skills, and it was just the understanding we had.
And I know that sometimes there's this question of like, well, are my guys even going to respect him? If they haven't ever been out in the field, then my guys aren't going to respect him. And I think that if you're concerned about that, then you haven't found the right leader yet. When you find the right leader, you're going to go, oh, I'm not worried about it. This guy's going to win him over, or this girl's going to win him over in
100%,
5 minutes. And so
awesome,
cool. I think this has provided a lot of value. We hope that you guys have gotten a lot of value out of this too. We love just having these conversations about the lessons that we've learned in business. So if this is something that interests you, if you want to be a fly on the wall while we talk about our fun history and stories and everything and learn some lessons along the way, then follow along. Just click the follow on the podcast.
You've been listening to the Co-Pilot Coaching Podcast, where business leaders come to master their mindset, elevate their leadership, and create lasting impact. Don't forget, you can connect with us online at copilot-coaching.com.